Hi, welcome back to another Unity tutorial. I previously did a series on PUN2's multiplayer networking, but in that series I didn't talk about voice chat. So in this episode, we're going to start talking about Photon Voice. It's pretty easy to get set up. There's only a few things you got to keep in mind. First off, not in this list here, is you need to make sure that you have Photon Voice purchased from the asset store. It's free, but you need to have it in your assets. That way, in the package manager, you can search for Photon Voice or Voice like I just did and import it into your project. But I already have it, so I don't need to import it. So here's the things that you need, assuming you've already set up everything else for like PUN2. You already are making a connection and everything. You need a Photon Voice game ID from photonengine.com. So you should already have created an app for your regular networking, but you need to create a separate app for voice. I know that seems a bit weird, and I still think it's weird, but that's how it goes. You need to create a separate app for voice. If you have a lot of apps like I do, there is a way to just show just the voice apps if you've created one that you want to reuse. And so make sure you get the app ID from there. And then what you'll want to do is you'll want to go into Window and Photon Unity Networking, highlight server settings, and put in the voice ID here on the Photon server settings. Okay. And then the next thing we need is a voice manager game object. Now this is just a way to stay organized. So just in your hierarchy, create an empty, zero it out by right-clicking transform and resetting. I'm going to call this our voice manager. Okay, it's not doing anything but just being a placeholder for us to hold some stuff so that we can find it in our hierarchy. And in that voice manager, we need a Photon Voice network component and a recorder component. So just add component, voice network. There it is, Photon Voice network. It does a lot of logging, so good tip, switch these to error. Otherwise your console will fill up with lots of logs in the editor. And the next thing we need is a recorder. And then we want to take this recorder and drag and drop it into this primary recorder property in the Photon Voice Network component. Been doing this for 3 years, finally starting to get the link. All right, and there's all sorts of settings you can look up here on the Photon Engine's documentation, but just to get started, know that you need those two things on your voice manager. Next thing you need is your player needs a Photon Voice view. This might not necessarily be completely important. I've watched several Photon Voice tutorials to try to figure out what works best for me. Since my use case usually is in VR and I'm using proximity audio, I definitely need my players to have their own voice stuff on them. But a lot of times in simple like single room, single camera angle stuff, kind of like I'm setting up here, you can set up a lot of stuff just in the scene and you don't need to necessarily put on your players, I think. But I'm going to show you what I do and it should work in most use cases anyways. So I need to go find my prefab for my player, and there he is. Look at that weird looking guy. Okay, so what all do we need on him? We need a Photon Voice view. Simple enough. Add component, Photon Voice view. And you need other stuff on it too, like a Photon view, I think. Maybe you don't. Maybe you wouldn't have to, but chances are you have it already. Okay, your player is going to need that for a multiplayer game. The Photon view, most likely a Photon transform view. And so here in the Photon Voice view, we also want to say use the primary recorder, and I want to set the log level to just errors. You could create a recorder to use. Other tutorials I've watched have you create a recorder prefab. I don't get the benefit of it. It seems like just using the primary recorder seems to work, so it's just less steps, so I like that. And again, that primary recorder is what we have here in the voice manager. This is our primary recorder, and we've dropped it into this primary recorder slot in the Photon Voice network. All right, your player also needs a speaker. So if we go back to our player, by that I mean we're going to create a child to house a couple different things. So we're going to right click on my player, create an empty. We'll go ahead and just reset that. And we're just going to call this our speaker. And we need two components. Yes, we need a speaker component and an audio source. But when you add the speaker, the audio source will get added automatically. So if I go here and I type speaker, there it is. Boom, the audio source comes in. And you can adjust these like you would any other audio source in Unity. There's nothing really to do on the speaker. But on the audio source, you may or may not do this, but what I do for VR is I like to take the spatial blend, either take it all the way to 3D, or if I always want to be able to hear at least a little bit all the players in the same room as me, maybe drop it down towards mostly 3D. But you can go full on 3D. And then what you want to do is, which I wish Rec Room, if you're watching this, developers of Rec Room, they're not. Rec Room's a game on VR. They have their 3D sound settings jacked up. Someone walks 2 feet away from you, you can't hear them anymore. So minimum distance, set it for 10 meters. That way, if there is a, actually, I think we can see the speaker here in the scene view, right? So this is actually showing you the range. It doesn't really tell you much in this scene because it's mostly empty. But that gives you an idea of how big 10 meters is. So I want to always be able to hear within 10 meters. And then what's the maximum I would want to hear? And does that show? You can see how far it is way out there. And really, I don't think I would want to hear that far away. So let's bring it into like, man, maybe not even 300, maybe just 100 meters. And so when they get past the 100 meter mark, you won't hear it all. So I think I want to go 200. Doesn't really matter in this use case for this tutorial. Let's go ahead and keep it full 3D blend. And yeah, so that's pretty much the setup. So let's go ahead and build this and see if it works. So I just built my project, but I made the same mistake I always make. And I didn't change my resolution to windowed. And I'm going to do 960 by 600. And I have no logic in here to quit the app or minimize it, so I had to force quit it. Let's try building it again. All right, here we go. We have the app built here, and there is the host player that has created the room. Okay, so now if I come over here into Unity and I hit play, I should be joining the room as well. There I am. And I should also be hearing myself, but I'm not. Am I? So I figured out my issue. Transmit enabled is not enabled by default. So this is actually, and we'll cover this in a future episode, this is what you would enable and disable for like push to talk. So if I go ahead and enable that, and we build and run this, we should see that this works. All right, so here we have our built one. Mic check, we don't hear anything because we're talking to ourselves. I mean, when we hit play over here, we'll be talking to ourselves too. We'll be talking to ourselves twice. And there we go. Okay, so voice is now working. So in the next episode, what we'll talk about is how to display who's talking. Otherwise, it might be hard to tell who's saying what. So we're going to show how to display an icon when someone's speaking and also enable push to talk. So stay tuned for the next episode for Photon Voice. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you later.